from Ontario. Sénatrice Galvez, s'il vous plaît, la parole est à vous.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. I have questions for Mr. Sanger and for Mr. Breton. Things are related, and I want to thank our witness because they were very clear in explaining the problem and explaining the solution, so I appreciate that. Mr. Sanger, whatever efforts many of the sectors are doing in reducing the gas emissions, the sectors in oil and gas and transportation are increasing. And that is why we have to tackle these two sectors. And so I'm happy that you are both today with us. Nearly a dozen of the country's oil titans, such as Suncor, Enbridge, CNRL, TransCanada, Imperial Oil, Cenovus, and Husky, have subsidies in tax havens. Some were also named among high-profile individuals and companies in the 2017 Panama paper. Question: do you know offhand amount of subsidies paid to the oil and gas sector? And could you describe some of the primary tax incentives provided to this oil and gas industry?
Certainly, and thank you very much for the question and the comments, Senator Galvez. I also just wanted to say, in relation to the discussion that we have been having, I took a quick look at our greenhouse gas inventory, and as Mr. Kingston has said, the transport sector has a role to play, but it's the whole road transportation sector is responsible for 20% of our emissions. Transport in general is 30%. So there's a lot more that we need to do. It's a really important area, but also a lot more that we need to do with other large emitters as well. And Senator Galvez raised those. In terms of your specific question, in terms of what the fossil fuel subsidies are, that's a very good question. And the government has committed to looking into it as part of, together with Argentina, as part of the G7. And it's a bit of a moving target, what the subsidies are, because some of those are collected afterwards. The most recent estimate from the International Institute for Sustainable Development is that there's at least $1.9 billion spent on subsidies to the fossil fuel sector in Canada. Now that doesn't include a lot of the tax ones. Some of the tax ones are exploration, development, some forms of accelerated depreciation, and then there are also a number of the non-tax ones as well. And you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of these larger corporations avoid paying a certain amount of tax because they have subsidiaries in tax havens. And in general, I wanted to also make the point that the operations of some larger multinationals as well. I mean, we've seen Amazon, for instance, this pays a very low rate of tax, and it undermines local communities in different ways. And their operations, which involve delivery all over the place, not that good for the environment. So we need fair taxation of multinational corporations through international corporate tax reform or tackling tax havens in that way. It can be good for the environment too.
Thank you. Mr. Kingston, Mr. Breton. I used to think that the electrification of transport was a very healthy and robust and resilient economy. And actually the pandemic have shown that despite of bankruptcies in many other sectors, your sector is very strong. And so I used to think that you don't need subsidies and that you're good. But the issue with climate change and the emission reduction is time. The clock is ticking and we need to accelerate. Yeah. Do you find fair that oil and gas, because we have to get rid of the oil and gas combustion vehicles, but we keep subsidizing this. So it looks to me that the right hand is doing the opposite of the left hand in the government. And the government doesn't have money to keep giving subsidies to everybody. And people are complaining about the debt and we are in the inflation and this. So you mentioned that the vehicles, electric vehicles are going cheaper and cheaper, and soon will be lower than the combustion. But how do you feel about the subsidies that are given to the oil and gas, and this making it permanent, our dependency to the combustion vehicles?
You want me to go first, Brian? Yeah, okay. Well, I remember back in 2012 when President Obama said oil and gas companies that received subsidies, we're actually going to be celebrating that. He said that in 2012. He said in 2013 we'll be celebrating 100 years of oil and gas subsidies for companies, and it could not stop the oil and gas subsidies in the U.S. So it's always interesting to me when I hear someone say, well, how long do you think we should subsidize electric vehicles? Well, I mean, if we subsidize them for 1/10 of that period, I would be happy. So to me, that's a very important issue, because you're absolutely right. We have to make a transition from fossil fuel dependency to fossil fuel independence and towards renewable and electric vehicles. So it's not just electric vehicles, but it's also renewable energy. But to add to that, I would say that what's very important is the fact that we have to make sure that we are able to train and retrain workers who right now are working in sectors who will be slowly going down, disappearing. So we have to get these workers to make sure that they learn how to work in the electric mobility sector. As you said, it's a growing sector, and right now we are in the middle of a pandemic, and we have trouble finding enough qualified people to work in the electric mobility sector. So we want to make sure, and I applaud the government for that, because in the budget they talked about money for training and retraining workers. We need to do a lot of that in Canada for the future of workers from Alberta, Saskatchewan to across Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Breton. To Mr. Kingston, 30 seconds, please.
Thank you. Yeah, very quickly, Senator, you made a great point around the fact that subsidies are about helping to accelerate this transition. And I am very confident that as this technology develops, people will see the benefits of EVs. They'll see the convenience, they'll see the reduced costs, and it will become a no-brainer. However, because we want this to happen more quickly than the technology is developing, that is the reason there's a role for subsidies. So they're critically important right now. They're not necessary forever.
Thank you, Senatrice Galvez.